In the bustling heart of London, where history meets modernity, Buckingham Palace stood as a timeless symbol of tradition and grandeur. Tourists from all corners of the globe gathered around its gates, cameras in hand, eager to catch a glimpse of the iconic royal guards who stood like statues, their crimson tunics and towering bearskin hats making them look almost otherworldly. Among these sentinels was Private James Calloway, a man whose presence commanded respect even in silence. Known for his unwavering discipline and calm demeanor, James had earned the admiration of his peers and superiors alike. Yet, on this particular sunny afternoon, he would find himself at the center of an incident that no amount of training could have fully prepared him for. The weather was perfect: bright blue skies, a gentle breeze, and just enough warmth to make it pleasant. Families strolled by, children pointed excitedly at the guards, and couples posed for photos with the palace in the background. It seemed like any other ordinary day, but sometimes ordinary days can take extraordinary turns. As James stood motionless, his eyes fixed ahead, he noticed a man approaching. This wasn't unusual. People often came close to admire the guards or ask questions, though they rarely received answers. But there was something about this man that immediately set off an unspoken alarm in James's mind. The man, Victor Langley, walked with an air of arrogance, his sharp features framed by thinning hair and a scowl etched deeply into his face. He wore expensive clothes, yet his demeanor screamed discontent. Victor carried a leash attached to a large, muscular Doberman, a dog that looked more like a weapon than a pet. Its piercing eyes scanned the crowd, its muscles tense, ready to spring into action at the slightest command. Victor muttered under his breath as he approached the guard post, his tone laced with disdain. "Waste of time," he grumbled loudly enough for those nearby to hear. "Standing around in silly costumes while real issues go ignored." Victor's words weren't subtle. They dripped with mockery and prejudice, targeting not only the institution James represented, but also James himself. Though James remained still, his mind raced. He knew who Victor was, or at least, he recognized the type. A vocal critic of anything remotely traditional, Victor had made headlines before for his inflammatory comments and confrontational behavior. Today, however, James sensed that Victor wasn't here merely to complain. There was a glint in his eye, a simmering anger that suggested he had come looking for trouble. As Victor stopped a few feet away, he began speaking louder, his voice cutting through the hum of chatter around them. "Look at you," he sneered, pointing a finger at James. "You're nothing but a glorified statue. What do you even do? Stand here and breathe." Some tourists glanced nervously, unsure whether to laugh or step back. Others whispered among themselves, sensing that this encounter might escalate quickly. James, true to his training, didn't react. His posture remained rigid, his expression unreadable. But inside, he felt a mix of emotions: anger, frustration, and a strange sense of pity for the man spewing hatred without provocation. What happened next would leave everyone present stunned, and change the way they saw both James and Victor forever. Victor's voice grew louder, each word dripping with venom, as he continued his tirade. He didn't just stop at mocking James's role as a royal guard. He began targeting his identity, spewing insults that were calculated to wound. "You don't even belong here," Victor spat, his tone laced with contempt. "What are you doing wearing that uniform? People like you should be sweeping streets, not standing in front of the palace like you own the place." His words carried a cruel edge, designed to strip away James's dignity and provoke a reaction. The crowd around them shifted uncomfortably. Some people exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to intervene or simply walk away. A few parents quickly ushered their children farther from the scene, sensing the tension rising like a storm about to break. Others stood frozen, mesmerized by the spectacle unfolding before them. Cameras clicked softly in the background as tourists captured the moment, unaware they were witnessing something far more intense than a typical tourist attraction. James, however, remained steadfast. Years of military training had drilled into him the importance of discipline, especially in the face of provocation. His heartbeat quickened, but his exterior betrayed no emotion. He focused on the horizon, his posture unwavering, as though Victor's words were nothing more than the distant hum of traffic. But inside, James felt a flicker of frustration, not because of Victor's insults, but because of the man's blatant ignorance. James had worked tirelessly to earn his place in the Queen's Guard. He had overcome challenges, pushed through grueling physical tests, and proven himself time and again. Yet here was a man dismissing all of that with hateful rhetoric. Victor, growing bolder as he failed to elicit any response, stepped closer. His Doberman strained against its leash, sensing its owner's agitation. The dog's low growl sent shivers down the spines of those nearby, adding an ominous undertone to the already charged atmosphere. "Come on, tough guy," Victor shouted, his face reddening with anger. "Say something. Or are you too scared?" He jabbed a finger toward James, his movements erratic and fueled by unchecked rage. "I bet you're just another one of those opportunists, using your skin color to climb the ladder while real Brits get left behind." The comment drew gasps from some onlookers, while others shook their heads in disbelief. One elderly woman muttered under her breath, "Shameful," as she turned away. A young man filming the scene lowered his phone, visibly uncomfortable. Even Victor's own dog seemed restless, its ears flattening against its head as if confused by the hostility emanating from its master. Still, James didn't flinch. His silence wasn't weakness, it was strength. Every fiber of his being wanted to respond, to defend himself and everything he stood for, but he knew better. Reacting would only give Victor what he wanted, chaos. But Victor wasn't done. Emboldened by James's lack of response, he began pacing back and forth in front of the guard post, his rant escalating. "You think this is impressive?" he jeered, gesturing wildly at James's uniform. "This is a joke, a relic of a dying era. Nobody cares about your silly little parade anymore." His voice carried across the square, drawing even more attention. Some passersby stopped to watch, while others hurried past, eager to avoid being caught up in whatever might happen next. It was then that Victor made a decision, one that would push the situation to a breaking point. With a smirk curling his lips, he unclipped the leash from his Doberman's collar. The dog froze for a split second, its sharp eyes locking onto James. The tension in the air became palpable, thick enough to cut with a knife. Victor leaned forward slightly, his expression darkening as he gave the command. "Go on, boy," he said, his voice low but deliberate. "Show this imposter what happens when you mess with the wrong person." For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The crowd collectively held its breath, bracing for what was about to unfold. The Doberman crouched low, its muscles coiled like springs, ready to strike. And yet, despite the imminent danger, James remained motionless, his gaze fixed ahead, as if he hadn't noticed the threat looming mere feet away. What happened next would defy everyone's expectations, and prove that true courage isn't always about fighting back. The Doberman lunged forward with terrifying speed, its powerful legs propelling it toward James like a coiled spring unleashed. The crowd erupted into gasps and screams, scattering in every direction as panic rippled through the square. Parents clutched their children tightly, pulling them out of harm's way, while others froze in shock, unable to believe what they were witnessing. For a moment, chaos reigned supreme. People stumbled over one another, cameras dropped to the ground, and the once peaceful atmosphere dissolved into sheer pandemonium. Victor stood back, his arms crossed, a smug grin spreading across his face. He had achieved exactly what he wanted: disruption, fear, and humiliation for the guard he despised so deeply. "That's right," he shouted, his voice rising above the commotion. "Teach him a lesson." His tone was triumphant, almost gleeful, as though this violent act was some kind of twisted victory. But his satisfaction was short-lived, because what happened next left everyone, including Victor, stunned. James, who had remained motionless throughout Victor's verbal assault, now faced an entirely different kind of threat. The dog was fast, its teeth bared and eyes locked onto its target. Yet instead of reacting with panic or aggression, James did something unexpected. In a single fluid motion, he knelt down on one knee, lowering himself to the dog's level. His gloved hand extended slowly, palm open, as if inviting the animal to approach. The crowd, still frozen in disbelief, watched intently, unsure whether this was bravery or recklessness. "Easy," James murmured softly, his deep voice cutting through the tension like a warm breeze. His words weren't loud, but they carried a calm authority that seemed to reach the agitated Doberman. The dog hesitated mid-stride, its claws skidding slightly on the pavement as it processed this sudden change in demeanor. Instead of hostility, James exuded calmness, a stark contrast to the anger radiating from Victor. For a brief moment, the dog's snarl softened, its ears twitching as it tilted its head curiously. Victor, standing off to the side, looked baffled. His smirk faltered, replaced by a look of confusion and growing irritation. This wasn't how things were supposed to go. The dog should have attacked, should have overwhelmed the guard, proving Victor's point about weakness and incompetence. But instead, the scene unfolding before him defied logic and his expectations. "What are you doing?" Victor snapped at the dog, his voice sharp with frustration. "Get him." But the Doberman didn't obey. Instead, it took a cautious step forward, sniffing the air as it approached James. The crowd, which had been buzzing with nervous energy just moments earlier, fell silent. All eyes were glued to the interaction between man and beast, each second stretching longer than the last. James continued speaking in hushed tones, his words gentle yet firm. "It's okay," he said, maintaining steady eye contact with the dog. "You're safe." Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dog's posture began to relax. Its hackles lowered, and its tail stopped stiffening defensively. Another step forward brought it close enough to sniff James's outstretched hand. Then, in a gesture that no one saw coming, the Doberman leaned in and licked his glove. A collective sigh of relief swept through the onlookers, followed by murmurs of astonishment. Some people clapped instinctively, while others simply stared, their jaws slack with amazement. Victor, however, was livid. His plan had backfired spectacularly, and the evidence was sitting right there at James's feet. The same dog he had sixed on the guard, now wagging its tail contentedly. "This isn't over," Victor shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his fury. He stormed forward, reaching for the dog's collar, but the animal didn't respond to him anymore. It stayed where it was, completely focused on James, as if recognizing something in him that Victor lacked: compassion. As the dust settled and the initial shock wore off, the reality of what had just transpired began to sink in. James hadn't fought back, hadn't retaliated, and hadn't shown an ounce of fear. Instead, he had disarmed the situation, not with force, but with patience and understanding. And in doing so, he had exposed not only the flaws in Victor's character, but also the power of restraint and empathy in the face of hatred. What came next would seal the story forever in the minds of those who witnessed it, and leave Victor scrambling to save whatever shred of dignity he had left. The square was eerily quiet now, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze and the faint hum of distant traffic. All eyes were fixed on James Calloway as he knelt there, the once aggressive Doberman now sitting calmly at his side like a loyal companion. The dog's tail thumped softly against the ground, its earlier hostility completely dissolved. It wasn't just obedience. It seemed more like trust. James continued to speak in soothing tones, his voice barely audible but carrying an undeniable warmth that contrasted sharply with the hostility Victor had unleashed moments before. Victor, meanwhile, looked like a man whose world had been turned upside down. His face flushed red, not just with anger, but also with embarrassment. He jabbed a finger toward James, sputtering incoherently as he tried to regain control of the situation. You tricked him," he shouted, his voice shaking. "This isn't real. You did something to my dog." His words carried no conviction. They sounded hollow even to his own ears. The crowd around them exchanged skeptical glances, their expressions making it clear they didn't buy his accusations. James finally broke his silence, rising slowly to his full height while keeping one hand gently resting on the Doberman's head. His movements were deliberate, measured, and calm, qualities that only seemed to infuriate Victor further. When James spoke, his tone was firm yet composed, cutting through the tension like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. "Your hatred doesn't define me," he said, his voice ringing out clearly despite its quiet strength. "And neither does your dog." The simplicity of those words hit harder than any insult or retort could have. They weren't meant to provoke or belittle. They were a statement of fact, delivered with such dignity that it left Victor visibly shaken. For a brief moment, the man faltered, his shoulders slumping as if the weight of his own prejudice had suddenly become too heavy to bear. But just as quickly, his expression hardened again, masking his vulnerability beneath another layer of bluster. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Victor spat, stepping closer. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, though he stopped short of doing anything physical. "This little stunt won't change anything. People like you don't belong here. You're a disgrace to this uniform." His words hung in the air, sharp and biting, but they lacked the impact they'd had earlier. Instead of intimidating James, they only highlighted Victor's desperation to salvage some semblance of dominance. What made the scene even more striking was how the crowd reacted, or rather, didn't react. Earlier, people had shuffled nervously, unsure whether to intervene or stay out of it. Now, however, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Spectators stood firmly rooted in place, their attention focused entirely on James. Some nodded approvingly. Others crossed their arms as if silently challenging Victor to justify his behavior. A few murmured under their breath, clearly unimpressed by his attempts to rewrite reality. Even the children who had been frightened earlier peeked out from behind their parents' legs, wide-eyed but reassured by the sight of the docile dog sitting peacefully beside the guard. James ignored Victor's rant, choosing instead to focus on the Doberman. With slow, steady movements, he retrieved the leash from where it lay discarded on the ground and clipped it back onto the dog's collar. The animal didn't resist. In fact, it leaned slightly into his touch, as if seeking comfort. The symbolism wasn't lost on anyone watching. Here was a creature trained to attack, to obey commands without question. And yet, when faced with kindness instead of fear, it chose connection over aggression. As James handed the leash back to Victor, his actions spoke louder than any words could. There was no triumph in his expression, no smugness or gloating, just quiet resolve. "Your dog is smart," he said simply. "He knows the difference between hate and compassion. Maybe you should try learning the same lesson." The remark wasn't harsh or accusatory. It was almost gentle, as if James genuinely believed Victor was capable of change. Whether that belief was misplaced remained to be seen, but the comment struck a nerve all the same. Victor snatched the leash roughly, muttering curses under his breath as he tugged at the dog to follow him. But the Doberman hesitated, glancing back at James as if reluctant to leave. It took several forceful yanks before the animal finally relented, trotting after Victor with visible reluctance. As the pair disappeared into the crowd, the tension in the square began to lift. Applause broke out spontaneously, starting with a few claps and growing into a wave of admiration for the guard who had handled the situation with grace under pressure. For James, the ordeal was far from over. He knew that what had happened would spark. As Victor dragged the reluctant Doberman away, the crowd's attention shifted back to James Calloway. The guard stood tall once again, resuming his stoic posture as though nothing out of the ordinary had occurred. But the energy around him was electric. People whispered excitedly, pointing and nodding in admiration. Some clapped softly, while others simply stared, their expressions a mix of awe and gratitude. It wasn't every day that someone turned what could have been a violent confrontation into a moment of quiet triumph. Among the spectators, a young woman holding her toddler stepped forward hesitantly. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. Her child, who had been frightened moments earlier, now peeked out from behind her legs, wide-eyed but calm. James gave a slight nod, his face unreadable beneath the brim of his bearskin hat, yet his eyes softened ever so slightly, a silent acknowledgment of her words. Others followed suit, murmuring their appreciation before drifting away, leaving James alone once more. The ripple effects of the incident, however, were far from over. Several tourists who had captured the scene on their phones began sharing the footage online. Within minutes, clips of the event spread across social media platforms, drawing thousands of views. Comments poured in from all corners of the globe, praising James for his composure and compassion. "This is what true strength looks like," one post read, accompanied by a video of the Doberman sitting calmly at James's feet. Another comment echoed the sentiment. "He didn't fight hate with hate. He showed us how to rise above it." Meanwhile, the authorities were quick to act. A nearby police officer, who had been monitoring the situation discreetly, approached James after ensuring the area was secure. "Are you all right, Private?" he asked, his tone respectful but concerned. James nodded curtly, maintaining his professional demeanor. "Yes, sir," he replied. "No harm done." The officer hesitated for a moment, then gestured toward the retreating figure of Victor Langley. "Would you be willing to file a report about what happened here? We take incidents like this very seriously." James paused, considering the question. Filing a report would mean stepping outside the usual protocol of remaining silent during public altercations. Yet, deep down, he knew this wasn't just about him. It was about setting an example, about showing that prejudice and violence wouldn't go unanswered. "I'll cooperate fully," he said finally, his voice steady. The officer nodded approvingly, jotting down notes before heading off to locate Victor and gather witness statements. Back in the square, conversations buzzed among those who had stayed behind. One elderly man, leaning on his cane, shook his head thoughtfully. "It's sad, isn't it?" he remarked to no one in particular. "That poor dog didn't deserve to be dragged into all this nonsense. Animals are reflections of their owners, they say. And if that's true, then that man has a lot to answer for." His words resonated with many around him, sparking discussions about responsibility and the consequences of unchecked anger. For James, the aftermath of the encounter carried a different kind of weight. While he appreciated the praise and recognition, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was still work to be done. Yes, he had diffused the situation peacefully, but Victor's actions highlighted a larger issue, one that couldn't be solved by a single act of kindness. As he stood there, gazing past the gates of Buckingham Palace, James reflected on the power of small choices. Every day, people faced moments where they could choose between reacting with anger or responding with understanding. Today, he had chosen the latter, not because it was easy, but because it was right. By late afternoon, news outlets picked up the story, broadcasting snippets of the viral videos alongside interviews with eyewitnesses. Journalists flocked to the palace, eager to speak with James, but protocol dictated that members of the Queen's Guard remained silent unless given explicit permission to comment. Instead, official statements were released, commending James for his restraint and reminding the public of the values upheld by the royal guards: discipline, dignity, and service to others. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting golden light over the square, life slowly returned to normal, or as close to normal as it could be after such an extraordinary event. Tourists resumed taking photos, children laughed as they chased pigeons, and the rhythmic marching of guards signaled the changing of the shift. Yet for those who had witnessed the confrontation, the memory lingered, a reminder that even in the face of hatred, acts of grace and humanity could shine through. And as James prepared to conclude his duty for the day, He couldn't help but feel a quiet. The fallout from the incident unfolded rapidly, both in the public eye and behind closed doors. Victor Langley, whose outburst had been captured on countless phones and shared worldwide, quickly became a target of widespread criticism. Social media users dissected his every word and action, condemning not only his racist remarks, but also his decision to sick his dog on a defenseless man. Hashtags like #StandWithJames and #CompassionOverHate trended for hours, flooding timelines with messages of support for James Calloway and calls for accountability against Victor. For Victor, the backlash was overwhelming. Known locally as a vocal critic of authority and tradition, he had never faced consequences for his inflammatory behavior until now. News outlets dug into his past, uncovering previous incidents where he had hurled insults or made derogatory comments in public settings. One particularly damning video surfaced showing him berating a shopkeeper over trivial matters, using language eerily similar to what he had directed at James. The mounting evidence painted a clear picture. This wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a pattern of prejudice and aggression. As authorities pieced together witness statements and reviewed the footage, they built a strong case against Victor. Charges were filed swiftly: incitement to violence, endangerment of public safety, and possession of a dangerously trained animal among them. When police arrived at his home later that evening, Victor's initial defiance melted into panic. It was just a joke, he protested, though even he seemed unsure of his own words. Officers confiscated the Doberman, citing concerns about its welfare given its evident mistreatment and aggressive training. Animal control officers noted scars on the dog's body and signs of stress, further fueling outrage online. Meanwhile, James Calloway found himself thrust into the spotlight. Requests for interviews poured in from news networks around the world, eager to hear his side of the story. Though protocol restricted him from speaking publicly without permission, his superiors recognized the importance of addressing the situation. After consulting with higher-ups, James agreed to participate in a brief televised statement, a rare exception granted due to the extraordinary circumstances. Standing before cameras outside Buckingham Palace, James exuded the same calm dignity that had defined his response to Victor earlier that day. Dressed in civilian clothes, he spoke directly to the audience, his voice measured yet heartfelt. "What happened today was not about me," he began, pausing to let his words sink in. "It was about showing that we have the power to choose how we respond when faced with hatred or fear. Violence begets violence, but kindness can break the cycle." His message resonated deeply, earning applause from those gathered and sparking renewed admiration online. Viewers praised him not only for his restraint during the confrontation, but also for his ability to humanize the situation. "I don't condone what Mr. Langley did," James continued, "but I believe everyone deserves a chance to reflect and grow. My hope is that this moment serves as a reminder to all of us that empathy is stronger than anger." If James's words struck a chord with the public, they hit Victor especially hard. Facing mounting pressure from legal charges, public scrutiny, and even estranged family members who distanced themselves after seeing the videos, he began to crumble under the weight of his actions. In a surprising turn of events, Victor issued a public apology through his lawyer. "I regret my behavior and the harm I caused." The statement read, "I allowed my frustrations to cloud my judgment, and I deeply apologize to Private Calloway and anyone else affected by my actions." While some dismissed the apology as insincere damage control, others saw it as a potential first step toward redemption. James, for his part, chose not to comment on the apology publicly, focusing instead on moving forward. He returned to his duties with quiet determination, letting his actions speak louder than any response could. As the days passed, attention shifted to the Doberman, which had been taken into protective custody. Veterinarians examined the dog thoroughly, noting signs of neglect alongside its rigorous training regimen. The local animal shelter stepped in to rehabilitate the creature, working patiently to undo years of conditioning designed to instill aggression. To their surprise, the dog showed remarkable progress, responding well to positive reinforcement and affection. Volunteers nicknamed it Hero, inspired by its role in highlighting the transformative power of compassion. For many, the story of the Royal Guard and the Doberman became more than just a tale of conflict. It was a lesson in humanity. It reminded people that even in moments of hostility, there was always room for understanding. And while justice would hold Victor, the days following the incident brought a wave of change, both for those directly involved and for the wider community touched by the story. Victor Langley's public apology, though met with skepticism, marked the beginning of what some hoped would be a journey toward personal growth. Legal proceedings against him moved forward, with court dates set to address the charges of incitement to violence and animal endangerment. The weight of public scrutiny seemed to hang heavily on Victor. Once brash and unapologetic, he now appeared subdued, his usual arrogance replaced by an air of regret, or perhaps fear of the consequences awaiting him. During one of the preliminary hearings, prosecutors presented evidence of the Doberman's mistreatment, including veterinary reports detailing scars and muscle strain consistent with forced aggression training. Witnesses recounted the events outside Buckingham Palace, their testimonies painting a vivid picture of Victor's deliberate provocation. When asked why he had unleashed his dog on James Calloway, Victor struggled to provide a coherent answer. "I was angry," he admitted haltingly. "I let my emotions get the better of me." While his admission didn't excuse his actions, it hinted at a man grappling with accountability for the first time in his life. Meanwhile, the Doberman, now affectionately nicknamed Hero by shelter staff, continued to make remarkable progress in rehabilitation. Volunteers marveled at how quickly the dog adapted to its new environment, responding eagerly to gentle commands and showing signs of trust that had likely been absent for years. One volunteer, Sarah, formed a special bond with Hero, spending hours each day playing fetch and teaching him basic obedience skills. "He's such a sweetheart," she told reporters during a segment filmed at the shelter. "You can see the fear melting away every day. He just needed someone to show him love." As Hero's transformation unfolded, so too did the ripple effects of James Calloway's actions. People from all walks of life reached out to express their gratitude, not just for stopping a potentially dangerous situation, but for demonstrating the power of restraint and empathy. Schools began incorporating the story into discussions about conflict resolution, using James's calm response as an example of how to handle hostility without escalating it. Even seasoned politicians praised him, calling his actions a testament to the values of discipline. The final chapter of this remarkable story unfolded in ways no one could have predicted, leaving a lasting impact on everyone involved, and countless others who followed the events from afar. For James Calloway, life eventually returned to its steady rhythm of duty and discipline. Yet, he carried with him a renewed sense of purpose. The incident outside Buckingham Palace had reminded him that his role as a royal guard wasn't just about protecting traditions. It was also about embodying the values those traditions represented: courage, compassion, and unwavering integrity. Hero, the once feared Doberman, became a symbol of second chances. After weeks of rehabilitation, the dog's transformation was nothing short of extraordinary. Once trained to attack, Hero now wagged his tail freely, greeting strangers with enthusiasm and bounding through fields during playtime at the shelter. His progress caught the attention of a local family who had been searching for a pet to adopt. They were initially hesitant, given Hero's history, but after meeting him and seeing how gentle he had become, they knew he was meant to be part of their home. On adoption day, Sarah, the volunteer who had worked tirelessly with Hero, teared up as she handed over the leash. "He deserves all the love in the world," she said, smiling through her tears. And so, Hero began a new chapter, surrounded by kindness and care. Victor Langley, too, faced a turning point. Though sentenced to community service and ordered to attend anger management classes, his journey didn't end there. During one session, he found himself paired with a counselor who challenged him to confront the roots of his prejudice At first, Victor resisted, dismissing the exercises as pointless. But over time, something shifted. Perhaps it was hearing stories from others in the group or reflecting on the consequences of his actions. Whatever the catalyst, Victor began to see the harm his words and behavior had caused, not just to James, but to society as a whole. By the end of the program, he wrote a heartfelt letter to James, apologizing again, and thanking him for showing restraint when Victor himself had shown none. It was a small gesture, but it marked the beginning of what many hoped would be true change. For the public, the story of James, hero, and even Victor served as a powerful reminder of humanity's capacity for growth and redemption. Social media buzzed with messages celebrating the outcome, while news outlets highlighted the lessons learned. One article titled, "From Hate to Healing," captured the essence of the narrative. In a world often divided by fear and misunderstanding, acts of empathy can bridge even the widest gaps. James, ever humble, avoided the spotlight after fulfilling his official duties related to the case. He continued standing guard outside Buckingham Palace, his presence as steadfast as ever. Tourists still snapped photos, children still waved, and life went on much as it always had. But those who knew the full story couldn't help but see him differently. To them, he wasn't just a guard in a red tunic and bearskin hat. He was a beacon of grace under pressure, proof that true strength lies not in domination but in understanding. As months passed, the memory of that sunny afternoon lingered, not as a tale of conflict, but as a testament to the power of compassion. Schools incorporated the story into lessons on anti-bullying and conflict resolution, while animal shelters used heroes' rehabilitation as an example of why no creature should be defined solely by its past. Even Victor's tentative steps towards self-improvement inspired conversations about forgiveness and personal accountability. In the end, the story came full circle. A racist man had set his dog on a royal guard, expecting chaos, but instead he sparked a chain reaction of healing and hope. James Calloway's quiet courage, hero's resilience, and even Victor's faltering attempts at redemption proved that even in moments of hatred, light could shine through. And as the sun set over London once more, casting its golden glow across the palace gates, it felt like a fitting metaphor. No matter how dark things might seem, there is always room for brighter days ahead.